West Baltimore. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the 15th of November, 2017. Detective Sean Sweeter is sitting in an unmarked Nissan Altima beside a junior partner he asked for by name. His phone rings. It is his lawyer. The call lasts 9 seconds. His partner will later tell investigators that Sweeter hung up and said it was somebody else. The lawyer was calling about the meeting they have at 5. To prepare for the federal grand jury, Sweeter is under subpoena to face at 1 o'clock the next day. A minute later, he drives onto Bennett Place, looking for a witness he calls Mary. She appears nowhere in the case file. His lawyer calls again at 4:27 and again at 4:30. He does not answer either one. At 4:36 and 10 seconds, Sean Sweeter runs into a vacant lot, out of the camera's view, drawing his weapon. 9 seconds later, his partner is back out in the street. No one else is ever found in that lot at all. 8 of his colleagues went to federal prison. The medical examiner ruled Sean Sweeter's death a homicide. An independent board later concluded it was suicide. Nobody has ever been charged. To understand why a homicide detective was under subpoena, you have to start with the unit he was not in. The Gun Trace Task Force was a plainclothes squad whose job was to get illegal guns off Baltimore streets. On the 1st of March, 2017, a federal indictment was unsealed describing what it had actually been doing. Racketeering conspiracy, robbery, extortion. 8 of its officers would end up in federal prison. The U.S. attorney announcing it said this at the press conference: "These are really robberies by people wearing police uniforms. Here is the range the Justice Department gave for what they took from people: $200 to $200,000. Sergeant Thomas Allers admitted stealing more than $117,000. On one occasion, he and others took more than $7,000 out of a house and filed a report saying $1,624. What went missing included a child's $200 birthday money and $900 of that month's rent. Detective Jamel Rayam executed a search warrant at a shop that sold birdseed. He found nothing, so he arranged for 2 associates to impersonate police officers and rob the owner's home of the $20,000 they had put aside for their tax bills. And he sat in a car nearby to intercept the officers who would respond to the call. And then there was the overtime. In the 2016 financial year, these officers each claimed between $29,000 and $83,000 in overtime, on top of their salaries. A Maryland state commission that went through the payroll afterwards found that, for some of them, the overtime nearly equaled their annual pay. One detective claimed $52,428.68 in a single year. The rule inside the unit, according to 2 of them, was that if any of them made a gun arrest, all of them filed an overtime slip as though they had been there. 3 of them claimed to be working while they were on holiday in the Dominican Republic. More than 800 cases would eventually have to be dismissed or vacated because of these men, and Maryland would have to change its law before the courts would vacate some of them. You might reasonably ask who was supposed to notice. Across the entire scandal, exactly 1 supervisor was ever disciplined over the overtime. He received a written letter of reprimand. Hold on to how little that is, because in a year, this same department is going to investigate something far worse, and it is going to investigate itself. And none of that is what Sean Sweeter was subpoenaed about. The grand jury wanted him for 1 traffic stop 7 years earlier. The 28th of April, 2010. A car pulls away from an officer named Wayne Jenkins in northeast Baltimore. Umar Burley is driving. Brent Matthews is in the passenger seat. The chase lasts a matter of seconds and ends with Burley's car hitting another vehicle. Elbert Davis, an 86-year-old man, is killed in that crash. Then officers say they found heroin in Burley's car. Umar Burley is charged. He pleads guilty. He is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and he served 7 of them. The heroin was planted. Wayne Jenkins later pleaded guilty to it. The 2 men's convictions were vacated in December of 2017 and April of 2018, and in November of 2020, Baltimore paid them $8 million. Sean Sweeter was at that scene in 2010. And here is where almost every account of this story goes wrong. 2 weeks after Suiter died, the federal government indicted Wayne Jenkins over that planning. In that indictment, Sean Suiter appears. He is not named. He is called Officer Number 1, and he is described in terms that imply he did not know the drugs had been planted. The investigators later told a state commission that they settled on that version of events because it was, in their words, most consistent with the totality of the evidence. That is the closest thing to a government conclusion about Sean Suiter that exists anywhere in the record, and it is exculpatory. There is one thing on the other side of the ledger. In October 2017, Detective Momodu Gondo pleaded guilty and began cooperating. Gondo told investigators that he and Suiter had robbed people together back in 2008, and that Suiter had known about the 2010 planting. That is a cooperating witness's account. It is not a finding, no court ever tested it, and Sean Suiter was never charged with anything. Keep that in mind because the difference between an accusation and a finding is the thing this entire story turns on. Those two things, the indictment and the accusation, were both sitting in a federal file in November of 2017, and a grand jury had a date. Sean Suiter enlisted in the Army out of high school in Washington, D.C., joined the Baltimore Police Department in 1999, and deployed to Iraq with the reserves in 2005. By 2016, he was in Homicide. He had commendations. He had no disciplinary actions. There was nothing in his personnel file to raise a flag about anything. On the 24th of October 2017, FBI agents approached him. He declined to be interviewed. They served him with a grand jury subpoena. According to the agent's own report of that conversation, he asked them one question: "Will I lose my job?" He hired a lawyer, Jeremy Eldridge. Eldridge was told his client was not a target. Inside the U.S. Attorney's Office, Suiter was classified as a subject. A target is someone prosecutors expect to charge. A subject is someone whose own conduct sits inside the investigation. It is not the same thing, and it is not nothing. The government offered him limited immunity for anything arising out of the Burley incident in exchange for truthful information. And there was a clock on it. Prosecutors had a statute of limitations problem with the 2010 planting. Unless they could tie it to an ongoing conspiracy, the 7-year-old incident was slipping out of reach. That is why his testimony mattered, and it is the part of the story that essentially no popular account carries. Now, you might be thinking that a police officer under federal subpoena in a corruption case against his own colleagues gets some kind of protection. A detail, a minder, somebody who knows where he is. There was none of that. The record contains nothing to suggest any protection was requested, offered, or provided. He was working a triple murder from the previous December on the 900 block of Bennett Place, and on the 14th of November he restarted that investigation for the first time in nearly 2 months. The case file does not say why. He also asked for a specific partner for the 14th and 15th. Not his usual partner, but Detective David Bomenka, who had been in Homicide for 5 months. Suiter was the senior of the two. The record states the fact and offers no explanation for it. He told Bomenka they were looking for a woman named Mary. Department practice requires a detective to write down identifying and contact information for a potential witness. There is nothing about Mary in the murder file, nothing in any informant file. The board that later reviewed all of it noted that the murder file reflects no witness leads at all. You will see why that absence matters, because Mary is the last thing left in this story. The next afternoon, both of them went back. Everything from here is on a clock because a resident on the 900 block of Bennett Place had a security camera pointed at the street. Both detectives are in plainclothes, which under department policy means neither of them is wearing a body camera. Suiter has a police radio and his personal phone. Bomenka has a phone. Almost everything in the next 4 minutes comes from Detective Bomenka's account to investigators. The camera and the phone records corroborate the times. 4:01, the 9-second call from the lawyer. 4:02, the camera records the Altima driving west on Bennett Place. Around 4:05, on Schroeder Street, they spot a man in the alley. They get out. They cannot find him. Bomenka looks at a pile of trash on the ground and wonders out loud whether they saw anybody at all. 4:24, They drive the block one more time and then they turn to head downtown and end the shift. They were leaving. If they keep driving, Sean Sweeter makes his 5 o'clock and his 1 o'clock the next day. Then Sweeter says he sees the man again. Bomenka, on the far side of the car, does not see him. Sweeter turns around and parks. They walk about a dozen houses down the alley and back. Bomenka says, "Maybe we're just seeing things." 4:27 and 4:30. The lawyer calls twice. Sweeter clicks it off. Asked if it was his wife, he says it was a friend, and he will call back later. At 4:32 and 24 seconds, the video shows both men step out from behind a parked white van. Sweeter says he is going to wait there and see if the man comes back out. 20 seconds later, he moves back behind the van, and Bomenka walks to the corner, about 60 feet away, to cover the other end. They hold those positions for a little over 3 minutes. Sweeter can be seen pacing. At 4:36 and 10 seconds, he runs into the vacant lot, drawing his weapon as he goes, out of the camera's view and out of his partner's sight. Just before he goes, he waves at Bomenka. Nobody knows what the wave meant. In the same second, Sweeter's police radio keys open for about 1 second. It transmits a sound nobody can make out. Some officers who knew him believe it is his voice. Then something that may or may not be a gunshot. Then the signal dies. Bomenka hears shouting and shots. Ballistics later established there were 3, all fired from Sean Sweeter's own weapon. At 4:36 and 18 seconds, 8 seconds later, the camera shows Bomenka running back out into the street away from the lot. At 4:36 and 51 seconds, he calls 911. He has seen nobody. Sweeter ran 26 feet. Bomenka ran about 60. Everything that killed Sean Sweeter happened inside a window of less than 9 seconds. Sean Sweeter was pronounced dead around midday the following day, roughly an hour before he was due in front of the grand jury. No suspect was ever named. What the department did next was seal off 6 square blocks of the city for 6 days. That perimeter is the last thing anyone ever found in connection with that lot. For 6 days, 6 square blocks of Harlem Park sat inside a police perimeter. Residents were stopped going to their own front doors. At least 21 citizen contact receipts were issued, 12 search warrants, 123 interviews, 54 tips, 33 vacant houses cleared. A reward that reached $215,000, which produced 52 leads, every one of them investigated with negative results. No suspect was ever identified. No person of interest was ever identified. Meanwhile, the police commissioner, Kevin Davis, was telling the public that Sweeter had approached a man in the lot, that the two of them had a brief conversation, that the man shot him, that the killer might himself be wounded, and officers were checking hospitals. He called him a heartless, ruthless, soulless killer. A review board went through all of that afterwards, and its verdict is worth hearing exactly as written. Neither the board nor the homicide detectives involved saw any evidence that Detective Sweeter approached a man in the vacant lot, that they had any conversation, or that the shooter may have been wounded. The board's finding on the commissioner was that he had repeatedly shared unverified and ultimately inaccurate information with the public, and that it served to nurture a variety of unfounded rumors and theories. Residents told the board that it had spawned theories that Sean Sweeter was the victim of an inside job. Baltimore offered $215,000 for information about a killer. It later paid the neighborhood it had sealed off to find him $96,000. That second payment settled a federal lawsuit. The court-appointed monitor overseeing Baltimore's consent decree had found the lockdown raised clear constitutional concerns and that the department had created disincentives for these individuals to seek to assist in the future. The city expunged every record it had created about those residents, apologized, and changed the policy. On the 4th of February 2018, the commander of the homicide unit wrote a memo saying the leads were exhausted and there were no suspects and no charges. The review board's verdict on that memo is the hardest line in its whole report. For all intents and purposes, the investigation was concluded. The public was not so advised. Hold on to those 2 sentences. They come back. 2 months later, a board was convened to work out what had actually happened. 7 members, 6 meetings over 4.5 months. More than 30 people interviewed. On the 27th of August 2018, the independent review board concluded that Detective Sweeter intentionally took his own life with his service weapon. Their case is a serious one and it deserves better than a summary, so here it is. He was found still holding his police radio in his left hand. There was blood spatter on the inside of his own right shirt cuff. Part of the gun barrel was in contact with his head when the shot was fired. He was right-handed and the wound was on the right. His DNA was inside the barrel and on the surface of the weapon. No other DNA was present at all. All 3 casings came from his gun, and there were no defensive wounds on his hands or arms. And he had been trained in the Army and at the police department to disable a weapon by pushing the slide if somebody grabbed for it. And there was the arithmetic of those 9 seconds. The board tried repeatedly to reconstruct a version in which somebody else took his gun, shot him at contact range, left no trace, and got out past the detective already running toward the lot. In its own words, we could not do so. And it examined one more possibility, which it is important to say out loud, because the rumor existed and the last 4 minutes have put a second man at that scene. The board asked whether Sweeter's partner could have shot him. It reconstructed the whole thing step by step inside those 5 seconds, and it found that scenario physically impossible. Detective Bomenka's weapon was never fired. The board said it was addressing the question only because of the rumors, in order to put the issue to rest, and it found that his reputation had been, in its own words, wrongly stained. The board also put 2 things in writing that cut the other way, and it put them in itself. The first is that it reached suicide by elimination. It says so plainly, this scenario is placed last for a reason. And it acknowledged the argument against itself that Sweeter had every incentive to make his death not look like a suicide, precisely because the benefits for an officer killed in the line of duty are far more generous than the entitlements for one who takes his own life. The second is the structural problem. Baltimore's police department investigated the death of its own detective using his own unit, knowing that one of the possible answers would cost his widow her benefits. The board said handing it to another agency would have been good judgment, and recommended doing exactly that in future. The board also noted this was the 6th report since 2011, telling the department the same thing about how it runs a complex scene. The previous ones came out of Torbit and out of Freddie Gray. They were, it wrote, temporarily heated and then discontinued, or merely given lip service. And there was one finding the board could not touch because it was already on the death certificate. That one will matter more, in the end, than anything the board wrote. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death homicide, officially, on the 9th of January, 2018. As of the most recent public reporting, that ruling has never been amended, so the state's official finding on how Sean Suiter died and the review board's conclusion about how he died have sat next to each other for 8 years, disagreeing. In 2019, a new commissioner asked the Maryland State Police to review it. They concurred with the board. On the 6th of November 2019, he announced the case was closed. The next day, the state's attorney said publicly that it was open and active. The police union said the same. 4 years after that, in 2023, the state's attorney's office confirmed again that it remained open and active. His widow rejects the suicide finding. The family's lawyer, the same man who spent that afternoon trying to reach him, called the state police review a rubber stamp on a flawed report. And the commissioner who ran the department at the time said he was never fully convinced, because nobody had interviewed Sweeter's wife or his friends about his state of mind. That unamended homicide ruling comes back one more time because federal law attaches a number to it. Sean Suiter had 5 children. In 2020, the city settled a workers' compensation claim with his family for $900,000. The city solicitor was careful to say what that money did not mean. Set that against what the rest of the case cost the city. Baltimore paid $8 million to the 2 men framed in the case Sean Suiter was subpoenaed about, and $900,000 to his widow and 5 children. And this is where the disagreement about how he died stops being an argument about paperwork. The federal death benefit for an officer killed in the line of duty is $350,000. Federal law makes that money unavailable where the death was caused by the officer's own intention. The state benefit is another $125,000. The city one would have paid his family his full salary for life. In 2018, the Baltimore Sun worked out that the suicide finding could cost the Sweeter family more than $500,000. Which brings you back to the sentence the review board wrote about the detectives who investigated their own colleague's death. They were well aware that if they found suicide, his wife and children would lose certain benefits. That workers' compensation settlement is a separate thing from the line of duty death benefits, and it decided nothing about them. The 3 line of duty claims, the city one, the state one, and the federal one, were all still undecided as of the end of 2023. Every one of the 8 officers was tried, or pleaded, and sentenced. As of the summer of 2026, 4 of them are out, and the one man who was under subpoena to appear in front of a grand jury about a single traffic stop in 2010 is the one person in the whole story about whom nothing has ever been decided. Not how he died, not whether he died in the line of duty, not whether his family is owed anything for it. There is no mystery here that a better investigation would have solved. There is a department that was told 6 times how to run a scene like this one, and a body that was found by the one unit that could never have been seen as objective about it. Which is what the review board meant in the 2 sentences it wrote about a memo. For all intents and purposes, the investigation was concluded. The public was not so advised. Nobody has ever found the woman he called Mary. Nobody has ever established that she existed. And that's the racket.